Well, hello there, everyone, and welcome back to Critical Wade Theory, where we dig into stories, ideas, and myths from history, culture, and beyond. And today we're saddling up for a trip to the Wild West, but not the one of white hats, clear cut heroes, and saloon duels. We're talking about Doc, a 1971 revisionist Western that reimagines the gunfight at the OK Corral. And even though I watched the movie a while ago, it's not exactly fresh in my mind. I'm going to talk about some of the basic aspects of revisionist history in the good sense. There's sort of a revisionist history that's bad that people can do, but there's also some stuff that makes things clear and more accurate. And we're going to look at some of that. So, Doc was directed by Frank Perry, known for Mommy Dearest, and written by Pete Hamill. And Doc strips away the romanticized veneer of classic westerns. It's gritty, dark, and morally ambiguous. A western for the skeptical 1970s, you might say. And along the way, as we examine this movie a little bit, we'll explore how Hollywood has shaped and sometimes warped our perception of the Old West and why it matters, why it's not just uh, a thing that we should just totally brush off. These topics actually do matter. It's part of how we can permanently see history and revisit the past and all that kind of stuff. It's a part of who we are and how we got here and all that kind of stuff. So, this is basically the first segment. I'll be talking a little bit about the film. So, let's start with the basics. Doc stars Stacy Keach as Dr. John Doc Holliday, a pretty famous historical figure. And you also have Faye Dunaway as Big Nose Kate and Harris Yulin as Wyatt Earp. So, all three of those are actually pretty famous figures. And in a way, this isn't your father's Western, so to speak. Doc gives us a tuberculosis stricken gambler and a lawman whose ambition blur the lines between justice and power. Kate Elder, often sidelined in earlier depictions, is portrayed as a strong yet troubled partner, adding complexity to the story. So, unlike earlier films like My Darling Clementine, which came out in 1946, that romanticized the OK Corral shootout, Doc questions the morality of its legends. This is revisionist storytelling at its finest, gritty, messy, and painfully human. So Doc Holliday is depicted as a disillusioned and cynical gambler suffering from tuberculosis, while Wyatt Earp is shown as an ambitious lawman who is willing to compromise principles to achieve power and fame. Sort of more like a crummy politician, I guess, in a way. Then you have Kate Elder, Holliday's lover, who plays a significant role as a strong and independent, albeit troubled woman. The movie diverges from the romanticized portrayals of these characters in earlier westerns by stripping away the heroism often associated with the gunfight at the OK Corral, instead presenting the event as a brutal and actually senseless confrontation. So that's giving you some insight into the style and themes. Doc is known for its realistic and unglamorous portrayal of the Old West, and the film critiques the traditional Western hero archetypes, emphasizing the moral complexities and human flaws of its characters. Its stark cinematography and moody atmosphere underline the bleakness of the story. So, upon its release, Doc received mixed reviews. While some praised its daring and unconventional take on the Western genre, others found it too bleak or slow paced. Over the years, though, the film has gained a small but loyal following among fans of revisionist westerns. And of course, if you just like to see a wide variety of movies, you might want to check this one out and see if it is right for you. So, here's a fun fact: the movie's screenwriter Pete Hamill was a journalist and novelist known for his gritty and insightful writing. His involvement in the project added a layer of authenticity and social commentary to the story. So, if you're a fan of westerns that challenge traditional narratives, Doc is probably worth a watch for its unique perspective and strong performances by its cast. So here's where we're gonna get into the myths versus reality aspect of movies, and I guess this is segment two if you want. So I think this movie might encourage people to challenge the source of your knowledge. Did it come from a credible source, personal experience, or societal norms? So in this case, the mythology of the Old West has been shaped by Hollywood, but how much of it is accurate? So, sure enough, there are some myths that can be debunked. It wasn't just a gimme a whiskey sort of era. I've heard that people would be actually doing cocaine and other mind altering substances even back then. But how often in these old movies do you, do you have somebody, talking about cocaine or something like that? I think heroin was even available back in those days. But there aren't that many westerns that even mention those things, right? So, not that I remember scenes like that in this movie. I I, I don't know if there was anything like that, but I just find it a point of interest that some of that stuff was around, sometimes even sold as if it was regular medicine. Yet, it's actually pretty rare for any western movie to mention it. You know, it's a point of interest if you're ever wanting to make a movie. You might want to possibly include the the sort of drugs that were around at the time. Yes, cocaine was initially used as a medical stimulant and anesthetic in the United States. However, by 1903, cocaine consumption had increased to about 5 times what it was in 1890 and was primarily used by non medical users. This led to a push for prohibition, which culminated in the Harrison Narcotics Act or Narcotics Tax Act of 1914. This law required a doctor's order for the dispensing of cocaine and other narcotics. So it was, sort of a reaction to the growing phenomenon of cocaine use. And another point beyond that, which should be addressed, is the topic of diversity in the West. You know, Western films often show a predominantly white landscape, but the reality was actually far more diverse even back then. So, did you know that 1 in 4 cowboys was African American? And Chinese immigrants built railroads, of course, and Mexican vaqueros defined cowboy culture. So, these are things that are probably sometimes mentioned in westerns, but they're kind of overlooked. And regarding the violence and the lawlessness of the Old West, so shootouts like the OK Corral were actually rare. While there was crime, of course there was some crime, but towns were often governed by strict laws and swift justice. The romanticized gunslinger culture was mostly a Hollywood fiction. You know, if anything, there's more violence today. Um, and in that sense, it was probably even harder to even get weapons back then, to be honest. So that might be one of the reasons. But I should mention that there actually was gun control back then. In this era, and in this era that so many people look back romantically at, there's probably in some instances more gun control than some people want today, in the United States. Um, so what about the cowboy lifestyle? You can forget the glamorous portrayal. Cowboys were laborers herding cattle in harsh conditions, typically for meager pay. And by typically, I mean probably with only the rarest exception. So, what about the role of women? Western films pigeonhole women as saloon girls or damsels, but history tells a different story. Women were homesteaders, some were business owners, and sometimes even sharpshooters, you know? So, how about that? And now we're moving on to section three. I'm going to be talking about media distortion and cultural impact. So, movies like Doc challenge the myths created by decades of Hollywood westerns. But what about the broader influence of film on our perceptions? I talked about this recently in a separate episode, but here, we're going to deal again with romanticized History. Films often simplify or exaggerate things. For example, westerns largely ignore the technological advances of the late 19th century, like railroads and the telegraph. Well, they don't totally ignore them, but like they're often portraying the times as a little more primitive than they were. And of course, there are cultural biases, stereotypes in film reinforce biases, whether it's the noble cowboy or the villainous Native American. Native American. Escapism and reality is another topic to address here. Watching too many dramatized movies can distort our understanding of real life complexities. And of course, another big issue is the treatment of Native Americans. So the myth is that Native Americans are, one dimensional villains attacking settlers or noble savages mystically connected to nature. And the reality is a little more complex than that. The history of Native Americans in the West is far more, I guess, diverse than that. Many tribes negotiated, traded, and coexisted with settlers, while others resisted violently in response to encroachment on their lands and unfair deals. And their cultures, strategies, and experiences were varied and deeply impacted by westward expansion and U.S. policies like forced removals and reservations. And of course, there was re education. Uh, that was a major attempt, trying to get rid of their way of life, basically, their languages, culture, all that stuff. So, for segment four, I asked the question, why does it matter? Why does it matter to get all this right? To get all this right? Um, well, it does matter how the West is portrayed, the Old West, because myths shape our cultural identity and understanding of history. Recognizing nuances like those in Doc helps us see the real human stories behind the legends and might even encourage us to investigate further ourselves. It's also a reminder to question what we think we know. Digging deeper, whether in history, science, or even our personal beliefs, requires curiosity and critical thinking. And you could definitely break a topic into smaller parts and ask a series of questions to explore its depth. That's part of the Socratic method. So, for instance, you might be like, what is this? Why does it work this way? What are its implications? What if it were different? Etc. So, it's one of it's one of those things like if you have repeated exposure to certain stereotypes about gender, race, professions, or cultures, you can have it subtly reinforce your biases and skew your perception. For example, villains being consistently portrayed as members of certain ethnic groups can create subconscious prejudices. And you might want to ask, like, well, hold on a second. What if somebody in my, ethnic group or whatever, my demographic, committed a crime or something? Would it be fair for somebody to assume that everyone in my group also commits those kinds of crimes? That's a sort of perception that is pretty common, among people to take even a small number of behaviors and say, oh, they're all like that. All the people in that group are like that. And, that can definitely be a darkened path for people to walk down. So, escaping into fictional worlds too frequently can cause detachment from real life responsibilities and problems, also, and this can lead to unrealistic expectations about what life should offer. So, this also comes down to critical thinking skills. Those who critically analyze what they watch are less likely to internalize unrealistic portrayals. Age and life experiences important too in that regard. Younger viewers or individuals with limited real world experience may struggle to differentiate fiction from reality. That's why some people say, well, serious dramas that depict things in a false way are potentially dangerous to young minds. That's not necessarily just people being like realist or unrealistically or stupidly hypersensitive. There's some actual stuff going on that kind of validates that view. Some people believe pretty much whatever they hear. They see it in a on a TV screen or whatever. They hear it on the radio as like a fact, and they're just going to believe it, especially if it already reinforces what they've previously heard. You know. So another thing that should be mentioned is genre preferences. Genres like fantasy or science fiction may have a lesser impact on one's view of reality compared to dramas or biopics, which claim to reflect real life. So that's why there might be a little less danger if you're watching something like Star Wars versus, a Western movie. I mean, sure, you could say that Star Wars has some negative depictions of, you know, something or someone, but at the end of the day, if the movie has a story that's highly fictionalized, like it basically is fiction, and it's, kind of a silly story perhaps, well, fewer people are going to draw immediate parallels between that story and real life. So, it's a good idea to balance movies with books, documentaries, and real world experiences to develop a more rounded perspective. And, well, that basically covers what I have to talk about here. So, the next time you watch a Western or any historical film, ask yourself what's real and what's myth. Movies like Doc are pretty good at starting a discussion and peeling back the layers of a legend and encouraging people to ask questions. So, thanks for joining me on this ride through the Wild West. I'm going to dismount my horse now, and I should have said "hiya" at some point, but it just didn't occur to me. I guess I'm saying it now as I'm getting off of my imaginary horse. So, if you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, especially if you're on YouTube and you found this. And let me know your favorite revisionist westerns or myths that you'd like me to tackle next. So until next time, keep questioning the story, and remember, history is never as simple as it seems. And here is where I would have some outro music if it wasn't just me talking into a microphone. Have a good one.